We are constantly learning new information about COVID-19, and CBSN Bay Area is committed to bringing you the very latest. We spoke with a doctor with Stanford Health Care about the race for a vaccine and the latest in testing.
There has actually been some very exciting and innovative developments in the testing realm. And, as a country, we haven't had access to enough testing, and that's really been the limiting factor in getting a handle on this pandemic. So given the shortages of testing reagents and swabs and whatnot, the FDA has been looking for effective alternatives throughout the last few months. And they have approved 5 different oral saliva tests to check for COVID-19. And most recently, just last week, actually, they did approve a test called SALIVADIRECT, which was created at Yale University, and that has been shown to be very, very promising. It's fast, it's cheap, it's convenient, and most importantly, it's reliable. So I'm really looking forward to having this on the market. It's different in a few ways. So the sample that's collected is saliva rather than nasopharyngeal secretions. So ultimately it is less invasive, and the patient can actually collect it themselves. So it reduces the risk of a healthcare worker potentially contracting COVID while testing. And it also helps decrease the need for PPE. We know that's also in shortage as well. So that's one benefit from it. It's less invasive, so less discomfort. And then this particular test actually has been validated with different reagents and different combinations of reagents and instruments. So it doesn't rely on one particular vendor or one particular resource for it to run properly. And so this gives the benefit of having us be able to scale this very quickly and broadly across the nation, and ultimately not run into shortages that we've been seeing. Saliva samples also are stable for longer at warmer temperatures, so it takes away the need to use preservatives or special tubings once the sample is collected to store it before the tests are run on it. So that also cuts down on cost, which is super helpful. And then ultimately what we're excited about is the sensitivity and the efficacy of detecting someone with COVID-19 from this test. How does this compare? And studies actually have shown that the sensitivity is comparable to the nasopharyngeal swab sensitivity. So that's very exciting overall. And I'm like I mentioned, this is extremely innovative, and we're excited to kind of have this on the market and scale so we can get better numbers, get a better handle on this pandemic finally. So we, at this point, have about 170 vaccines being developed. And majority of them are still in the preclinical testing, about 135, and 47 of them have been actually advanced into human trials. And so what that means basically is once a vaccine is developed, it has to go through certain testing in a stepwise fashion. First, the preclinical testing has to occur in animal models to actually see if an immune response is elicited when they get the vaccine itself. And then once it passes the preclinical stage, it then moves on to phase 1 and phase 2. And that's really where we see smaller groups of humans receiving this vaccine. And it helps determine what the dosing requirements are. So what dose is effective, how safe are these doses, and how effective are these doses? So are we seeing any sort of immune response in humans? And then ultimately, once a vaccine passes the first 2 phases, then they go on to phase 3. And this is where the money's at, because they compare thousands of people that received this vaccine, and they compare them to thousands that actually have received a placebo vaccine in the same manner. So the patients ideally are randomized, they're blinded, they don't know what they're getting, if they're getting the placebo or if they're getting the actual vaccine. And they're monitored over time. And that can be months to years, depending on what vaccine is being studied. And they look at whether or not these people will get the disease. If they do, how severe is it? And ultimately, they determine the effectiveness based on this. Now, per the WHO data this past week that came out of the 47 vaccines that are in human trials, about 25 are still in phase 1. About 15 have moved on to phase 2, and 7 are actually now in phase 3. So this is very exciting, and we are seeing these vaccines from different areas in the world. We have a couple from the US themselves, the Moderna vaccine, as well as the Pfizer vaccine, and the AstraZeneca from the British, Swedish company as well that's being studied. And all of these look very promising. There, of course, have been reports about vaccines from China and Russia that have been approved for humans. At this time, unfortunately, we don't have enough data. They have not gone through the phase 3 trials, but they are being used. So we will have to wait to see what comes out of that. But again, the ones that are in phase 3, they do look promising, and we hope to know more as we study this in more people. But yeah, very exciting stuff going on. While I'm optimistic and excited at which the speed of which we're developing these vaccines and they've gone into human trials, we do have to be realistic. When we do get a vaccine that has passed phase 3, initially access will be limited. And I am assuming that high-risk individuals, people that are essential workers, people that are on the front lines will be the first to get it. So it may not be available publicly to everyone initially, depending on the supply. And then once the vaccine is out, it doesn't negate the need to take the precautions that we're already taking. So the universal masking, the social distancing, those are all still going to be equally important as we learn more and more about this vaccine and the effectiveness, and as it's administered to more and more people. And most importantly, I will say, this vaccine, scientists are predicting, will be about 50% effective, which is actually, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it is moderately effective. And what that basically means is that when a vaccine is given, they ultimately think that about 50% of people will develop an immune response, which is great. But it doesn't hit the target of 60 to 80% that is required for herd immunity. And that's really where we see protection for not just an individual, but the entire community from immunity gained via the vaccine or an infection itself. And so if the effectiveness is at the 50% range, that leaves the rest of the population to get the disease organically, and that itself is going to take time. And so we expect that it will be very helpful, but it's not going to catapult us into the pre-COVID normal that we all know. It wasn't too long ago where we were getting updates from the CDC on what this rare syndrome was, what the symptoms were, what the expected clinical course was. And just a week and a half ago, actually, the CDC released an updated report on children. There were about 570 children that fit into this initial definition that the CDC put out in May. And they studied the presentation, the course of these children, as well as mortality rates. And so what they found, interestingly, was that there isn't one specific class as they had initially thought. So the MIC class is one of the categories that children fell into. But that was only about 35% of the cases. And these are the children that had the multiple organ systems involved. They had more of a cardiovascular as well as a gastrointestinal involvement and symptoms. And so they were coming in with abdominal pain, myocarditis, shock, and needed ICU care. And so this was thought out to be a delayed reaction. But as we found out from the latest study, that only about 35% of kids fell into this category. Another 30% actually fell into more of an acute category, so acute COVID symptoms. And this was mostly respiratory symptoms, so things like a cough or shortness of breath, pneumonia, ARDS or acute respiratory distress syndrome. And so this was the second category of patients that were identified, and unfortunately the category where they saw the highest mortality rate. And then the third category was of the remainder of the children, so about another 34.7% that fell into the category that was very similar to a Kawasaki disease toxic shock syndrome category, which initially is what we thought was going on when we saw the cases sprouting up in UK and all over Europe. And so this is where kids have more of a rash, more mucocutaneous lesions, coronary artery involvement, and less so other organ systems. And so that was something that new that came out. They also did identify, very similarly to adults, there were health disparities that were very much noted and were significant in the study as well. They saw that the patients, out of the 570 kids, 40% of them were of Hispanic and Latino communities, and 33% were from Black communities. So this is very much still real, and is affecting our children as well. So while this is still a very rare syndrome, we do want to keep our eyes and ears open. And if you are suspecting that your child or your teen is falling sick, please don't hesitate to call your healthcare provider and get immediate medical care. This is an extremely difficult and challenging time. It has been since all of this started, but I want you to remember that there's no right way to do this. We're all still learning, and everyone knows that everyone is learning. So be patient with yourself, be kind. And with that said, there are some things that can help you along the way. So the first thing that I usually recommend is, with COVID and the summer, there was really no structure for most children and teens. And so developing a morning routine or a morning rhythm just to kind of set a nice tone for the day, having your child wake up at the same time every day, going to sleep at the same time every day, getting time to take care of their personal needs, having breakfast before logging in, that can kind of help maintain a regular schedule and consistency, which is very important. So even though they're not going to school, having that pre-school routine back in place rather than rolling out of bed and logging on will be very helpful for both parents and children alike. And then the space in which they are attending their virtual classrooms in, I usually recommend having, if resources allow, having a quiet and designated space, ideally with a table or a desk. If that's possible, that is helpful. Having the area that is clutter-free, and for our younger ones, not having toys around because they do get easily distracted. So that can all be very helpful. And then that kind of goes into my next pointer, which is basically scheduling breaks. As a family doctor, we don't like to promote screen time or continuous screen time, but obviously that has been thrown out of the window this year. Things have changed dramatically. And while we can't control how much screen time is going to be used for school, it is important to designate some periods during the day that are screen-free. Ideally, getting the kiddos outside, getting some fresh air, involving some physical activity is going to be super helpful. Physical activity in general is very helpful for attention, for memory, focus, and productivity. And so that'll overall help with the day and schooling and education. So making sure that your kid or teen are having breaks throughout the day as well. And then last couple of things, keeping a planner or basic calendar. This will help organize things. So because we're going to be missing the face-to-face interaction, things are going to get lost in translation. Things will get missed. So having something that has an organized way to create checklists, and this will help your child or teen kind of keep track of things and be held accountable as well. So that can be very helpful. And then lastly, try to remain calm. Our kids feed off of our energy. And so know that there will be technical difficulties. I have them all the time with my virtual visits and telehealth visits. And so know that that's going to happen. It's going to be a part of your routine, and try to remain as calm as you can. Things will get messy, but that's okay. We're all in it together. Kids are resilient, and they will figure it out, as will you. So good luck, and I really do feel for my parents, and I know that we can all make it. It's just a matter of time.